Roger Stone here. Your dollars are losing ground, but gold isn't. American Sovereign Bullion helps you protect your wealth through real, tangible assets. Through their nationwide wholesaler network, you get some of the best pricing on gold and silver delivered straight to your door. Since 1912, the U.S. dollar has lost 97% of its purchasing power. Meanwhile, gold continues to prove its strength. So call 844-272-2428. That's 844-272-2428. Or visit dyingdollar.com to request your free gold and silver guide. That's dyingdollar.com.
This is the Stone Zone with Roger Stone.
People love him and respect him. Roger Stone.
Now, get in the zone. It's the Stone Zone. Here's Roger Stone.
And I'm Jake Novak in for Roger Stone this evening. Great to have the opportunity again. A lot of moving parts in the news today, internationally, domestically, locally, depending on what city you're talking about. So I want to try to get to as many of them as I can. Again, as you know, I still believe, obviously, our war with Iran, which is at the ceasefire position right now, but we, of course, still have literally hundreds of thousands of American servicemen and women in forward areas. We now have 3 aircraft carrier groups in the waters off of Iran. That's rare to have that, extremely rare, with the USS George H.W. Bush aircraft carrier arriving there. So this has to be your top concern. Again, you know, one of the things I talk about a lot is we all know that there are a number of biases in the news media, and you know it's run by humans still, so humans are always going to have biases, and we focus so much on the left-wing bias, which is real, it's destructive, and it's constant. But I actually believe that there are 2 biases that are even more prevalent, and they're just as destructive and just as, you know, in my case, annoying. And one of them is the 2 that are even bigger than the left-wing bias. The number one is the bias in favor of negativity, bad news, stories that will frighten you. I think that's been true since the caveman days, the caveman drawing days. But there's also the geographic bias. If you're in your bubble in New York or D.C., especially New York, and that's the way you're going to look at the rest of the world. And even though in New York City in the 5 boroughs, there are quite a few people who are from those areas, from these 5 boroughs, who are serving in the military, there are not so many of them in Manhattan, and certainly not many people who work in the news media here in Manhattan know someone in the service, ever knew anyone in the service. But in the rest of the country, this is a big deal. Everybody knows someone. And so that's why I considered it, you know, that's not the only reason. Of course, we're in a historic battle against a really, really dangerous enemy, one that's been an enemy of the civilized world for 47 years. So, of course, that would be the big story anyway. But the fact that so many Americans are personally affected by this, they have a family member, they have a friend, they have loved ones, and this is life and death. So, to me, that's why this has to continue to be our top story for so many reasons. Now, we don't know if these peace talks that are scheduled for Pakistan in the next day or so are going to happen. We still don't know for sure. It looks like some Iranian contingent is there. And we also don't even know that if they do meet U.S. envoys, presumably again Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner and some others with them, and then meeting with the Iranians face-to-face, we also don't know if it's going to go anywhere. You know, we just heard from Senator Roger Wicker. He is the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, a Republican, obviously. And he just came out and said he doesn't really think that the negotiations are worth it with this regime. And he may have a point, obviously. So, I mean, we've heard some Iranian folks saying that. To hear that from such a high-ranking senator, no matter what his real power is, he's still a high-ranking senator, is interesting, to say the least. So I think that's important. I think we all would like to see the end of it, people being in harm's way, an end of fighting. We're in the ceasefire now, so it's not like we've been seeing bombs going off constantly, although that's not the case in Lebanon, and I'll talk about that in a second. But at the same time, we certainly don't want to see this regime remaining intact and being able to, after however long, to go back to funding terrorism, which is really all they did, and pursuing a nuclear program, which is part of their terrorism. So it's two pieces of the same picture. That's what we want. We want to see that end. And we'll have to see where we go from here on that. Meanwhile, it does feel like we might get closer. I mean, if I had to guess, it feels like we're getting closer to open hostilities again. We learned that Britain and France have told their citizens that if they're in Iran, they should get out. I'm surprised they didn't tell them to do that already, but that alert was sent out. The U.S. has sent an alert to U.S. embassy workers in London. If you're working in the U.S. embassy in London, they want you to be extra vigilant for Iranian-backed terror attacks in London and in Great Britain. So, sometimes you hear that stuff and you realize something's going to happen. And that's exactly what happened before the war in Iran started in the first place several weeks ago. People who were considered non-essential personnel at all those U.S. bases in the Middle East within range of Iranian attacks were told, here's your chance to get out. People in Israel at the U.S. Embassy told to get out. If you remember this. And sure enough, a couple days later, our attack on Iran and Israel's attack on Iran began. So, I see my voice is cracking because we're talking about life and death here. It's getting me a little nervous. But this feels like an absolute precursor to perhaps hostilities beginning again. I would love for Iran's regime, what's left of it, to just unconditionally surrender already. It seems obvious to people like you and me that they're not going to win this thing, and there's nothing they can do really to salvage themselves. And all these erroneous reports about the Trump administration being ready to pwn up tens of billions of dollars to this regime are just that, ridiculously erroneous. It's just so stupid. I know where they're coming from, by the way, and I'll talk about that in a second. But there's no chance of that happening. So, sure, it makes sense to you and me, but we're not dealing with rational people. Now, as far as where all that money and where these reports are coming from, I did some digging into this because during the week and last week, I was hearing from some of the usual suspect Trump haters in my timeline and in my personal life. And they're like, oh, are you going to apologize to Obama for all that money he gave to Iran because Trump's going to give him more? And I'm like, what? Who would he even give it to? I mean, think of the logic in that. And then I realized where the reporters are sort of getting this. And this is not an excuse for them at all. This is still a ridiculous stretch. This is coming from the floated idea that when Iran either surrenders or a regime gets there in place that will work with us, the U.S. government will encourage U.S. oil companies to start doing business in Iran, which will, of course, lead to billions of dollars of investment in Iran. It's not like pallets of cash going to the terror leaders of Iran, going to the mullahs like Biden and Obama gave them. I mean, it's quite the stretch to say, oh, see, Trump's going to give them even more money. It's not even to the same people, and it's not in the same way. And it may not even happen. I don't, just because the oil companies will potentially be allowed to do that doesn't mean they're necessarily going to do it. They got a lot of drilling to do here. And even if things are peaceful forevermore in Iran after this war is over, it's a schlep, as we say, to go over there. They may have as much oil to drill here in this part of the world, and on and on, and again, a lot of other points. Now, again, as I said before, I was going to tell you what's going on in Lebanon. The shooting has already started again in Lebanon. Hezbollah has broken the ceasefire that President Trump announced between Israel and Lebanon, although it's really Israel and Hezbollah. Israel's never had any problem, or at least not any shooting wars with the government of Lebanon. This has always been about Hezbollah, which is Iran. It's just Iran's Lebanese army, Lebanese terror group. And Hezbollah has broken that ceasefire several times in the last day or two, and the Israelis have had to retaliate. They're almost in full-blown blows over there. So, This is all developing right now as we speak, and it's going. And again, if I were a betting man, and you can't say that lightly anymore because of these these betting markets where you can bet on war outcomes, which is really very scary, especially since some of the people who make these decisions and carry out the war have been caught betting on these things. It's kind of like Pete Rose betting on baseball, if he had been betting on his own team. We'll never know for sure on that one. But the thing is, if I were a betting person or advising someone like that, and I would like not to know someone like that, I would tell them I think this thing is going to get hot again. The war is going to get hot again, if I had to guess. I hope not. I would really like to see an unconditional surrender. I would like to have our USS Missouri moment for you history buffs. That's where the Japanese surrendered to Douglas MacArthur on the deck of that ship to end, effectively World War II, because the Japanese lasted longer than the Germans. But I don't think we're going to get that from this crew. And because of that, I think we're going to get into a hot war again. Hope I'm wrong, and I hope we get that. I hope we get that surrender. All right. The other burning story in America, very much so, continues to be this incredible scandal, incredible evidence against the Southern Poverty Law Center, and I want to get you updated on that, including a very personal story about the SPLC from my life 25 years ago, about 25 years ago, which was the moment when I realized this group was no good. I'm Jake Novak in for Roger Stone. This is the Stone Zone. Stay with us.
This is the Stone Zone with Roger Stone.
He likes politics and he's a professional at the highest level. Roger Stone. Where's Roger?
Pepsi Prebiotic Cola in original and cherry vanilla. That Pepsi taste you love with just 30 calories and no artificial sweeteners. Pepsi Prebiotic Cola. Unbelievably Pepsi.
Lowe's has the brands pros trust to get the job done. You can now shop new Catalyst fencing solutions and save big when you do. 10% off when you buy in bulk. Plus, save $180 on a DeWalt 12-inch dual-bevel sliding compound miter saw. Now just $449. Our best lineup is here at Lowe's. Valid through 5/6 while supplies last. Selection varies by location.
This is the Stone Zone with Roger Stone.
Roger Stone, who's a one of the smartest political minds. Roger Stone was persecuted. People forget he's actually a brilliant political analyst.
Now, get in the zone. It's the Stone Zone. Here's Roger Stone.
And I'm Jake Novak on this Friday night filling in for Roger Stone. You know, we have a story developing here in the New York area, actually not far from my home, that I think is a much bigger story, and it's pretty scary as it's being reported anyway, but I think it's a much bigger story than it's been reported. I believe this involves terrorism. I believe it's a more sophisticated incident than people are being led to believe. It involves an elite public high school on Long Island. I'm going to talk about that in the next half hour, but I want to talk about the Southern Poverty Law Center, and you've heard so much about it in the last few days. You haven't heard so much about it on the mainstream media, although kudos to CBS Evening News doing a big expose on the Southern Poverty Law Center a couple of nights ago, and good for them for joining in what the conservative news media has been covering. But everyone should be covering this scandal, records, receipts, financial stuff proving that they had been funding these right-wing hate groups, supposedly right-wing hate groups, just, all of them, KKK, the white supremacist groups, in order to create a need for their quote-unquote services, and also to create a narrative of America being a much more hateful country than it truly is. And we've got plenty of hate in this country. We don't need to manufacture any thank you so much, SPLC. But I wanted to tell you a personal story about this organization, one that I certainly wasn't a big fan of them 25 years ago, but they crossed the line for me because of something that happened in my family involving the SPLC. My father it turns out, you might remember the case in Alabama many years ago when then Judge Roy Moore wanted to put the Ten Commandments in public buildings in Alabama, especially at the state Supreme Court. He wanted to have this big artistic sculpture of the Ten Commandments put there, and there were a bunch of people suing against it, saying that this was a violation of church and state, setting up an official religion. Now, it just so happens that my father is a great expert on religious law, theology, and specifically Jewish law and tradition. And it just so happened that he had written, well before this case became a thing, basically expanding on the fact that according to the early rabbis, and this is during the Roman era, the Ten Commandments were considered to be civil law and not religious law. They were considered, anyone who believed in God and was living in that area this was your law as well. This was your cornerstone of morality. So it wasn't anything specifically just Jewish, in other words. Now, because my dad had written that years before, the state Supreme Court of Alabama called him down as an expert witness in that case. And he was questioned about this, and he explained the concept. I don't know if the court understood it. From what I understand, during the proceedings of the original case, the judge wasn't so smart. I'm not talking about Judge Roy Moore. I mean the judge who was presiding over this case. And who knows what the people in the court understood or didn't understand. But that was why my dad was called, because the idea was, hey, wait a minute, maybe this isn't a specific one religion over the other. Maybe this isn't just Judaism or Christianity. If it's all religions, if it's a monotheistic ethos, and that was what the Ten Commandments were considered to be, especially at that time. At that time, during the time of the Romans, the Ten Commandments were part of the daily prayers in Jewish life. You had to read, that was part of the morning prayers. So it was something that kind of like was done publicly and recited publicly. Anyway, one of the lawyers suing against this one of the people suing against this was the Southern Poverty Law Center. And for the life of me, I don't know exactly what they had a problem with. I don't understand how this has anything to do with necessarily bigotry. I can understand the stretch, but it's quite galling when you consider the SPLC was basically set up to help protect the rights of black people in the South and to fight the KKK until they started funding them. I mean, the incredible ignorance of these people. Do they not understand that the abolitionist movement in this country was a church movement? It wasn't a bunch of communist students from university. It was a church movement through and through. So the idea that like anything religious is somehow bigoted is beyond me. It's really frightening to me that it's a combination of hatred and stupidity, which, by the way, go together. Hate makes you stupid. So an SPLC lawyer gets up there to cross-examine my dad, like he's a hostile witness. He's not. He's just telling them what he had written about many years before and explaining that. He's not there to be a buddy to Judge Roy Moore. For all he never met him. I know my dad never met him. Still hasn't. None of that was in play. My dad was just there as an expert on this, and nobody in that courtroom or even in the world can hold a candle to his expertise on this. He wasn't there to help anybody win a case necessarily. He was asked questions, and as a citizen in this country, he answered the questions that were posed to him. Well, the SPLC lawyer proceeded to smear my father, basically saying, well, wait a minute, you're a professor at these universities and at University of Virginia, but isn't it true? And he gets like the court into a hushed silence. Isn't it true that you are also an ordained rabbi? And he starts twirling his like fingers around his sideburns, so like as if my father's like some kind of Hasidic rabbi in disguise. Ooh, a rabbi. Dun, dun, dun. I mean, not only was that stupid, but it was just like, what was he trying to do? To get like, apparently it was like some New York guy who thought like, well, in Alabama, if I identify this guy as a rabbi, everyone's going to come out with a baseball bat and beat him. I mean, I don't know what they were trying to do there, but the SPLC can really go pound sand. This is something that happened 25 years ago or so. Yeah, I take it personally. I didn't like them before that, to be honest, but now, since then, I've really known what they're all about, which is, trying to stir up hatred. I talked about that being the number one bias in the news media. Well, we ain't alone on that one. There are people in this world whose number one cause and number one goal in life is to stir hatred, stir fear, create controversy because they profit from it. And those people should be given a tremendous punishment. I believe that people who fake hate crimes should be given a minimum of a 10-year federal prison sentence. And I think people who organize national fake hate crimes should be given life in prison, because a faked hate crime has the same effect as a phony one. It still instills terror, but it also smears the people who didn't have anything to do with it. It's a double crime, and it's a heinous one. All right, when I come back, I'm going to let you know what's going on Long Island, because it's a story you're not going to hear anywhere else. I'm Jake Novak, in for Roger Stone on the Stone Zone.
I get so many headaches every month.
It could be chronic migraine, 15 or more headache days a month, each lasting 4 hours or more.
Botox, onabotulinum toxin A, prevents headaches in adults with chronic migraine. It's not for those who have 14 or fewer headache days a month. Prescription Botox is injected by your doctor. Effects of Botox may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away, as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness can be signs of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Side effects may include allergic reactions, neck and injection site pain, fatigue, and headache. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Don't receive Botox if there's a skin infection. Tell your doctor your medical history, muscle or nerve conditions, including ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome, and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects.
Why wait? Ask your doctor. Visit BotoxChronicMigraine.com or call 1-800-44-BOTOX to learn more.
This is the Stone Zone. Now, get in the zone. It's the Stone Zone.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone. Where's Roger Stone?
Here's Roger Stone.
And I'm Jake Novak, filling again in for Roger Stone. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got a story here in the New York area on Long Island that is, I believe, a much bigger story than the public's being led to believe, and it's yet another example of how far journalism, basic journalism, has fallen off a cliff in this country. Let me give you the particulars. Maybe you heard about it yesterday because it was somewhat reported nationally yesterday, although probably not that much. There's a town on Long Island in Nassau County called Syosset. It's a wealthy area. Syosset High School is one of the top public high schools in this country, routinely ranked in the top 10, very, very competitive. A student at Syosset High School who folks at the school say was drawing swastikas and other stuff on school property was being investigated for that. The cops came to his house on Wednesday. And while they were at the house, they found very dangerous bomb-making materials and bombs in particular different stages of readiness. The father says, no, wasn't making bombs. He was making rockets for a school project, and I got him these materials. And that's what you're reading in the mainstream media and all the media. Really, no one else is covering this except for me, these other details. Now, what also in those mainstream media reports were a couple of clues that, of course, they couldn't follow up on because they either didn't know how to do it or just didn't want to. They reported that the father said that he went to many different hardware stores to buy these bomb-making materials. Now, for a lot of you listening right now, an alarm bell just went off, and I know exactly what alarm bell went off because I'm like you. I don't live in the bubble here in New York City where no one knows about anything that's anything remotely not white collar. For those of you who don't know, if you work in a hardware store in America, and I don't care if it's Home Depot or some mom and pop place, if you work there, you are trained to understand that there are certain ingredients that you can buy to make a bomb. And if someone ever comes to the counter buying those 2 or 3 things at the same time, you are to red flag that. You are to call your manager and maybe even call the cops and don't let them leave. And certainly don't let him or her buy those things. So when I heard that this dad went to multiple hardware stores where he could avoid that red flagging by buying one of these ingredients at a time without setting off the alarm bells for this, that set off alarm bells for me. And it should have if reporters who covered this stuff in the New York area knew anything about this kind of stuff, but they clearly didn't get that. All right, that's one thing. Second thing is, there's no other follow-up to the story. Did anyone ask Syosset High School if there was such a project where this kid could be making rockets? We don't even know. No, who knows? I mean, I at least put that in the story. Questions were asked, we didn't get a response, or they said, we don't know, whatever. No questions were asked about the immigration status of this father and son. His name is Francisco Sanles. We don't know where he's from. We don't know if they're immigrant. But of course, the mainstream media now feels that if anyone has asked their immigration status, that's racist and it's not right. But it would be a fair question to ask because I did a little bit more digging and found out the address that this person lives in Syosset. And he's definitely not the homeowner. He's living in a home that's, by the way, happens to be for sale for about $1 million. Last time it was sold was 11 years ago, but we did learn in the story that this family, or this guy and his son, have been living here for 2 years, or living in that address for 2 years. So are they renters? Is it an illegal rent? Are they squatters? Probably not squatters, because in that neighborhood, everyone would notice. Are they relatives of the owners? Have they been placed there by someone? Where exactly did he come from? Need to know all these things. This is journalism 101, people. And I understand that if they couldn't get the answers to these questions in the local news media outlets that cover this, you at least have to tell the listeners, the viewers, the readers that you tried. We asked the Nassau County Police Department what his immigration status was. They didn't tell us. We asked the high school, is there any rocket project going? No, we don't know. I mean, you can do that, and it's frustrating to have to type that sentence. It sounds like you're not getting anywhere, but it's just basic. It's your job. And I have so many questions about this story, and there's so many things that I don't believe. Part of it is I'm having a hard time believing that's his real name. I'm looking at this guy's picture, and I'm sorry. And maybe I'm not supposed to racial profile, mea culpa 100 times if I'm wrong, but it doesn't look like a Latin American to me. I could be wrong, and if I'm wrong, I will say I'm wrong. But I'm not here to say, that's not my point. My point isn't to say, they really looked into this guy's face. My big point is, I don't think they've asked enough questions, period. What's your nationality? We have an illegal immigration crisis in this country. Under the Biden administration, we had tens of millions of illegal immigrants coming into this country. And even if most of them aren't criminals, and I'm sure most of them aren't, it's still a net gain of criminals coming into this country. I love these people who think this is a reasoned argument. Well, what's wrong with these illegal immigrants? They commit murder at a lower rate than the people who are here legally, which, by the way, has not been proven definitively. Don't accept that statistic. But even if it were true, so we're still importing some criminals into this country that shouldn't be here. What percentage of murder is acceptable to you? And what a stupid argument that is, even if it were true. And I'm not sure it is. This has been one of the biggest demographic news stories affecting the lives of almost every American in the history of this country, and certainly in my lifetime. And so whenever anyone is arrested for something and we really don't know exactly their history in a neighborhood, that should be asked. And it's not racist to ask it, and it's irresponsible not to ask it. I did see some local news outlets saying that they didn't know his immigration status, so good for them. Although most of them didn't, and they certainly didn't make it an issue to really pound the table on, because so far we still don't know. By now we would have known if they were really making an issue out of it. They're not. I don't know if this kid is really even this man's son, because we also know that so many people came over the border during the Biden years claiming to be families when it turned out the adult was a child trafficker with children, or using children as kind of a human shield. This isn't crazy conspiracy stuff, folks. This is all heavily documented, and the numbers are astounding. The numbers are off the charts. For anyone who still believes the arguments like, well, illegal aliens help our economy, those were studies based on a trickle compared to what massive flood came into this country during the Biden years. There's been no economic study into what happens to a country when 20, 30 million illegals come over in 4 years. There's never been any numbers on that we can fathom. Stop making 1980s, early 90s arguments about our current situation. And, the news media and the left wing in America have made it, have won over what, the easily winnable newsrooms in this country, and gotten them to the point now where they're willing to agree not to use the term illegal alien. They're willing to not even ask. They're willing to use whatever pronoun someone wants to use, even when we're looking for a suspect. And it would be nice to know if this were a man or a woman that we're looking for. I mean, all these kinds of things which actually endanger public safety, and at the very least, endanger your ability to want to read their stories and their journalism. This is still a business, folks. And you've heard me make this point before if you've listened to me or looked at my social media. And by the way, if you want to see the picture of the suspect and you want to see some of the other information that I've dug up on this story, you can just follow my X feed at JakeNY, and you'll find it all. You'll scroll through a lot of things, but you'll find it all. But if you've heard me in the past, you know that one of my big pound the table issues is that that journalism is still a business. It's a business, and you want to make your money ethically, but it's still a business where we're trying to make money. And yet so many of the news media outlets in this country clearly don't have making a profit as any one of their goals whatsoever. The problem is some of the companies that are the parent companies of some of these outlets like NBC News or ABC News, some of the companies that own those media outlets are public companies with shareholders. And I think the shareholders should know, if you're a shareholder in Disney, if you're a shareholder in Comcast, which owns NBC, and I can name a lot of others, you should know that your company, your money is being invested in a company that has division after division that aren't interested in making money. I think you should know that. I also think it's actionable. I think the shareholders of Comcast should sue Comcast for carrying divisions in their business, expensive divisions that have no intention of really making money, that are just there to parrot a political statement. And if the Comcast lawyers were honest in discovery, they would say that's true, but we're doing that for the overall goal of protecting the profits of our other divisions. In other words, we use NBC News and MS Now and CNBC. I know they spun them off, but they still have controlling interest. We used all those entities to basically be a de facto lobbying outlet, so that our really important money-making entity, the broadband cable stuff and everything else like that, which is susceptible to regulatory hell. I mean, Congress could snap its fingers and put Comcast out of business, considering all the regulatory okay you need to run communications and telecom and stuff like that in this country, in any country. And I would love for the NBC Comcast lawyers to admit that's why we put so much pro-bureaucracy, pro-swamp, usually the Democrats in control, content on our news platforms, because we're trying to make them feel like we're their friends so that they don't screw us in regulatory hearings. Same thing with Disney. Remember when Ron DeSantis decided to fool with Disney's exemptions for their theme parks in Florida and how scary that was for Disney? Well, imagine the federal government doing something like that. So Disney's going to make ABC and even ESPN woke, ABC News, as much as possible, so that those congressmen and women and bureaucrats in D.C. feel like they're on their side. It's a loss leader, in other words. It's a lobbying, and probably cheaper than lobbying, but still not a money-making enterprise. And if I'm a shareholder, I want that in my public, I want that in my quarterly earnings statement. I want them referred to as a lobbying organization that loses money on the top line, but it hopefully makes money on the bottom line. That's what I want. That's the kind of disclosure I demand as a shareholder. And right now, the local news operations that are owned, especially in New York, they're all owned and operated by the national news media. They're not doing enough to get me to want to click on that story and follow it. Let me tell you something about culture on Long Island, especially in Nassau County. This story hits all the major hot points for people who live in Nassau County. Public schools. You know, the competition between the elite public school systems in Nassau County. That would be Syosset, Jericho, Roslyn. For those of you who live in this area, you know what I'm talking about. The competition is fierce. And anything that involves the news in those school districts is a big story for anyone who lives in Nassau County. One. Two, it involves real estate. This is a $1 million listed home. There's not a lot of homes under $1 million in Syosset, but it's a pretty modest home. I want to know how these people got in there. What's going on? Is this an illegal rental? What's the real value of that house? It's being listed now. I want to know all that, too. That's another big, hot-button issue on Long Island. Not to mention, someone might have brought in bombs to kill people in a school. And, oh, by the way, Syosset is a very Jewish area. Syosset High School is filled with Jewish students. This hits all the major hot buttons, and you're just going to give this the quick 30-second move and then move on? Are you interested in getting an audience, news organizations, or are you interested in just being boring and being lobbyists? I don't know. Please make your mind up, because this is a heck of a story. Even if it just turns out to be just what it is now. Maybe it was just a kid being reckless. Who knows? Either way, it's still a huge story, especially for that area, and they're not covering it properly because of a combination of them not knowing how, and clearly there isn't the will. What a way to make a business. Imagine if you went to your local sandwich shop and the guy didn't know how to make a good sandwich and didn't care. You wouldn't go to that sandwich shop anymore, would you? Boy, for all the talk about capitalism and greed, the greatest achievements in American and world history have been done in selfish self-interest. That's how you cure cancer. That's how you create the airplane. That's how you make refrigerators and on down the line. You want to get paid. And yeah, you want to do a good deed sometimes too, but you need to get paid for your work. That's how it works. And they haven't been able to create anything better despite what you've seen on Star Trek. I'm Jake Novak, filling in for Roger Stone on the Stone Zone. Going to have some sound telling you something nice in the world. in a few seconds when we come back. Stay with us.
This is the Stone Zone with Roger Stone.
It is a great, great person, Roger Stone.
The Stone Zone. This is the Stone Zone with Roger Stone.
Roger Stone, who's a one of the smartest political minds. Roger Stone was persecuted. People forget he's actually a brilliant, brilliant political analyst.
Now, get him his own. It's the Stone Zone. Here's Roger Stone.
And I'm Jake Novak, filling in for Roger Stone. One more segment here on the Stone Zone this evening. And I don't want to be guilty of something that I was complaining about at the top of the program and then in the middle of the program as well. I don't want to be guilty of the news media's number one bias is just negative stories and frightening stories and just divisive stuff. I'd like to be able to finish off at least with something a little bit more heartwarming. And, today was the release of this new biopic about Michael Jackson. I think it's just called Michael. I've read about it. I've seen the commercials for it. I don't know if I'm going to see it, but I'm intrigued. I have to admit I'm intrigued. But what I've read about it is that it stays away from the controversial stuff. Obviously, the sex and the molestation stuff, it stays away from that. And for those of you who think like, well, that's really leaving out a lot of stuff, understand that this movie is not pretending to be about everything in this person's life. It's about his step from being a part of his group with his brothers to being a solo act, and what an incredible sensation it was. That anyone who lived through that, as I did, and this was my teenage years, so this was, not only did I live through it, but it was something that was really targeted at me and my demo. You couldn't avoid it. I can tell you, it was an extraordinary thing. The interest in this guy and his solo career when it took off was interesting. And just as someone who's interested in history, I was very interested when I learned certain things about Michael Jackson. And I don't know if this movie is going to talk about this, but this is stuff that I've heard from a number of people who worked with him over the years. Was his first solo album was 1979. It was an album called Off the Wall. It was an incredible success. It was a huge hit. And then I remember being shocked when I saw some of the documentaries about the making of Thriller, which was the next album, which came out in 1982. I remember being shocked to hear that both Michael Jackson and Quincy Jones being his longtime producer, and of course the great Quincy Jones from other things that he did, were really disappointed in the sales for Off the Wall, even though it was this huge hit. They thought that this was so groundbreaking that it should have been the greatest album of the decade. And so that was their motivation when they did Thriller. They were like, darn it, we're going to get it now. And they sure, and boy, did they ever. I don't know if you like that music or not, but they certainly hit it with that album. I mean, that album was it was constantly on the radio. The first one was Billie Jean. That was the first release. I mean, that was constantly on the radio, and then Beat It. And then when Thriller came, I mean, it was just good luck turning your radio dial back then and not hearing one of the songs from that album. It was a huge hit, and it was a massive amount of work and a massive amount of dedication involved. And they had a chip on their shoulder because Off the Wall, even though it was this huge, huge hit, wasn't big enough in their minds considering what they had done on that album. So that's interesting to me. And from what I understand, that's what this movie really focuses on. And on the national tour, international tour that they went on and everything else like that. So with that in mind, there's been a lot of people connected to the Michael Jackson history who have been going out on TV and doing interviews. And one of them is this woman named Raymond Bain, who was a publicist for Michael Jackson for a long time. And she's been out telling the story about Donald Trump and Michael Jackson going back to 2005. Listen to this.
President Trump, who was not president at the time. But, I never will forget a conversation he said to Michael. He says, you have a place here at Trump Towers. As long as I'm alive, you'll never lose it. And do you need anything? He offered financial support. Yeah, and that's the truth. President Trump, who was not president.
That's Raymond Bain. And, look, does that mean that Donald Trump is the philanthropist of all time? And maybe you could say, well, Donald Trump had soft spots in his heart for certain celebrities. Particularly, it seems like he's had soft spots in his heart for a long time for African-American celebrities. I'm thinking of some of the other ones he's helped over the years. But so what? It doesn't matter. It's an act of kindness. And I just think that it's an interesting little caveat. I wanted to end on something a little bit more positive, but understand, folks, that, anyone can really decide to create an impression of a public official, of a public figure. And one of the things that's really struck me about Donald Trump is that no matter how many people I meet, I never usually get necessarily the same story. I hear people who say something bad about him. And of course, we see that in the mainstream news media every day. And I don't meet too many people who have had a personal bad experience with him, but I read about it in the media just like you do. But when I meet people who have had personal dealings with Donald Trump, whether it was in business or when it was show business, especially on shows like The Apprentice and things like that, I hear good things. Here's the bottom line. I'm probably never going to be a close friend with Donald Trump. Not because I have a problem with him, because I clearly don't. But if I'm going to spend my whole day, like so many people do who hate him especially, turning my guts inside out about things about him that bother me, maybe I ought to find out some of the good things too. Just a little bit of mental health care for all of you. All right, I'm Jake Novak. This has been the Stone Zone. Enjoy your weekend.
Putting off replacing your window treatments because you think it's complicated? At Blinds.com, we spent 30 years proving it doesn't have to be. And right now, our Spring Black Friday sale makes it easier than ever. Whether you want to DIY it or have a pro to handle everything from measure to install, we've got you. Free samples, real design experts, and zero pressure. Just help when you need it. Shop up to 45% off site-wide. Huge savings on doorbusters. Plus a free professional measure now during the Blinds.com Spring Black Friday sale. Rules and restrictions apply.